These are going to be our notes for 5.3, so please make sure you've opened up your Unit 5 notes, you've scrolled down to 5.2, and you've given yourself a 5.3 and underline it so you can separate these from your other notes. Let's do this. So we're going to get into the two different categories of organisms. And I know that we're pretty familiar with this, but I want to make sure that we understand because these are going to impact the ecology and ecosystems of certain areas. So we are going to have two major categories. You're going to have your producers and your consumers. Now, within your primary producers, you have your autotrophs, which we know are self-feeders. So those are the ones that make their own food, and they provide actually the energy for everybody in the ecosystem because the autotrophs will be consumed by the heterotrophs, and other heterotrophs will consume one another, and then therefore kind of providing that foundational level of energy for all organisms in that ecosystem. There's actually two types of producers. I know that we've talked about organisms that will do photosynthesis, but there's also a new process called chemosynthesis that we're going to discuss this in these notes as well. Now, we know what consumers are all our heterotrophs, which means they need to go out and get their own food. And this is how they get energy by eating other living things. And this includes animals and, believe it or not, some carnivorous plants. So after you watch this instructional video, please watch the video that I'm going to include that will describe the Venus flytraps and the pitcher plants. In addition to animals and plants, we also have our detritivores and the decomposers, which will fall underneath the consumer category because they need other living things to get their energy. So I know that we delve deeply into photosynthesis and the process that plants or autotrophs use sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to produce its own food, glucose, right? And oxygen. So I know photosynthesis is something that's very familiar to us with what autotrophs use to make their own energy. However, there is also this other type of process called chemosynthesis. And this is where other autotrophs and bacteria will actually use chemical energy instead of the sun's energy because they're either not exposed to sunlight because they're deep down underneath the sea or in like a cavern area where they aren't able to access sunlight, but they can use the chemical energy, which is usually either methane gas, especially at the bottom of like the ocean near a hydrothermal vent, or hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide and water. And they use that to actually make its own food. So in another video that I'll attach here, you can look at how the mussels living at a mud volcano, there's evidence that they are doing chemosynthesis because they are releasing bubbles. So we know as a waste product of photosynthesis that oxygen is the waste product, and that's what we use to breathe in. But what's actually released in the end of a chemosynthesis reaction is going to also be an release a gas that will be obviously wrapped around a water so that it will look like bubbles coming up. So the bubbles coming up is evidence that we can physically see that chemosynthesis is occurring in that video. So make sure you check that out after these notes as well. So once again, we know our autotrophs make their own food, and they will either do this by photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. We have our consumers, which are all of our heterotrophs. So these are specific types of consumers. I know some of these are going to be very familiar with you, but I just want to make sure if you forgot or can't remember that we're reviewing these. So we know carnivores eat meat, so they only eat other animals. Herbivores are going to eat plants and vegetation only. Omnivores are going to eat both. We have scavengers that are going to consume other dead animals that were killed by predators or just simply died due to natural causes or maybe due to a natural disaster or whatnot. You're going to have decomposers, which we know of as like fungi and several bacteria. Remember, they're saprophytic, so they are going to release their digestive enzymes to break down the organisms and reabsorb the nutrients that way. And then to the next level that we have, and we've talked about earthworms, snails, shrimps, and crabs in our invertebrate unit. They're called detritivores, and these organisms actually are ones that feed on the dead organic material. So the decomposers are going to break this down, and the detritivores are going to eat that broken down material. So you may or may not have ever heard of this type of consumer before. So this may be something new for you, and let's explore that a little bit deeper. So, decomposers and detritivores are actually like the Earth's natural garbage can and waste dump, honestly. If we did not have these two types of organisms, we'd be over our heads in dead matter and garbage and trash. So, the interesting thing that you may or may not know is that most producers, so a lot of plants will actually die without being eaten. And that would be, like leaf litter on the bottom of a forest floor, or even just a tree falling down after a storm. There's lots of producers that just die and they don't get consumed by other heterotrophs, which would break them down further. So thankfully, we have these things called decomposers. And once again, we know that the decomposers are going to release their, when things die, like the producers, they return to the soil and they release their nutrients. So the decomposers are actually going to release those digestive enzymes, break those producers down, and reabsorb that material. So they decompose the dead things. Now, what's interesting is we also have this thing called, you'll hear it's pronounced two ways. It's either detritus or detritus. It depends on potato, how you want to say it. But I say the detritus pathway is basically now we have a different type of organism that's actually going to consume the dead material that the decomposers had broken down. So earthworms are an excellent example of this. So yes, they tunnel through the earth and eat dirt and tiny rocks and things like that, but they also actually help further break down the dead matter that's inside the soil. Crayfish, any type of bottom feeder in the ocean is going to be considered a detritivore. They are going to eat the dead decomposing material that's on the floor of whatever ocean they're living in and consume that and break it down further by digesting it. So, shrimp, worms, even like the dust mites that live invisibly in places that you might not like to think of, like your pillow and your mattress, are eating your dead skin cells and breaking that down so that we don't have a bunch of dead skin in our bed. Yummy. That concludes our notes for 4.3, and now I'm sure you may never look at your bed the same.